Welcome to Forging Plowshares, a community dedicated to cultivating the peaceful kingdom of God. We hope this part of our ongoing conversation stimulates your mind and challenges your heart about what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Please stay tuned at the end of the podcast for a short message about our ministry.
In this beginning to the conclusion of Class 8, Jordan Wood lays out then the course in a kind of three-part section of a final letter of Maximus, taking on then the picture of synthesis and the role of synthesis, that it is not simply an accomplished fact, but it is a fact that is both accomplished and being accomplished, that it is an unfolding action and reality, an accomplishment of the Trinity. And then he ties this into personhood and into humility as a kind of summation both of the class and of this final letter that he's looking at with Maximus. We hope you've enjoyed these podcasts with Jordan Wood. We have two more that will be coming out, and this will conclude then the section with Jordan. We hope you might consider taking the class with Plowshares Bible Institute. We do have a class that is coming up on Bernard Lonergan, that we have one of the leading experts on Lonergan that will be leading the class in February and running for 8 weeks. You can sign up for the class now. Registration is open. The class costs $150 to take the course. We have not decided the day of the class, but we will decide that then when everybody is gathered and gather a consensus, and hopefully we can meet the requirements of everybody and come up with an optimal time. But hope you enjoy this final podcast or series on Maximus the Confessor with Jordan Daniel Wood. Well, what have you thought of the Maximus class?
Oh, I've loved it. I took the one that Jordan taught through Chris Green's little institute there too before this. So this is my second time.
It was just a shorter version, right?
Yeah, it was a shorter version. It was less material, shorter duration. I think it was like 4 weeks so it's like half the length. And this has been even better.
Yeah, I mean he's saturated us in material. I mean, yeah. I'm going to have to take time after the class.
This particular one, which he taught in the other class, the one that we have for this week, it's just like I can't get over this thing. I just keep sending it to everybody. This little letter is just like packed, so much extraordinary stuff.
Now, did he translate this letter?
Mm-hmm, he did.
Okay, yeah. I know your other job is not this, but do you also have a background in theology?
So no, it's great books actually, is what I studied, and I only have a bachelor's degree. I just am just I often refer to myself as just a redneck who reads. I have no just I'm very much an autodidact.
At least with me, my own education had very little to do with going to school. I did go to school, but actually getting an education happened at a different time.
Right.
Clear through my Master of Divinity, I was just kind of focused on getting the degree, which was ridiculous. And I can't say that I benefited a great deal from it.
So yeah, that's one. It's interesting. It's like one thing that I will say about one of the colleges that I attended. I studied great books everywhere I was at, but one of the colleges I attended was Thomas Aquinas College. I loved Thomas Aquinas College. I ended up transferring back to another college in Washington State because there was some family stuff going on, and I wanted to be closer to home. But they're very much there. I will say this for them, that they were very much focused on learning for its own sake. They gave out grades, but they encouraged students to not even look at their grades when they got their report cards, just to keep them in a sealed envelope and be focused on
good.
For its own sake. The other college I went to was the Evergreen State College, where actually that's where I started. I did my freshman year at Evergreen State College. Richard Alexander was the lead professor on a great books program there. There were four professors in the program because Evergreen has a sort of interdisciplinary approach to everything it does. So even though it was a great books program, one of our professors was a Danish guy, Niels Skov. He was an actual Nazi hunter, by the way,
Oh,
like literal Nazi hunter.
uh,
Interesting guy. He lived an incredible life.
yeah.
But his PhD was actually in marine engineering. He was one of the professors in my great books program freshman year. Evergreen was not really fitting me, and Richard Alexander told me I didn't belong there. Straight up, he's just like, "Why are you even here?" He kept saying, "Why are you even here?" Like, he liked me. He liked
Yeah.
me. He's like, yeah, you shouldn't be here. And he actually at that point, he's like, even then, in like this is like 89, 90, he's like, he had the sense that Evergreen was falling apart even then, even though he had been one of its founders.
Yeah.
He encouraged me to transfer somewhere else. So I ended up transferring to Thomas Aquinas College. And I spent a year at Thomas Aquinas College, but then I ended up coming back to Washington and finishing up at Evergreen. What I did is I just did a bunch of independent contracts. So I keep studying what I wanted to do, and because Evergreen gives you the flexibility of doing that.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah. So I studied church fathers at Evergreen because why not?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Connor, you're in the midst of a program right now. Is that right?
Yeah, philosophy with a concentration in history at the Holy Apostles College. It's in Connecticut, but I'm doing it online from Eastern Washington State.
Sounds heavy.
It's mostly a Thomist school, but I feel like I'm getting the basics, and I already kind of have alternative views from like here and David Bentley Hart to have a good mediation and get a holistic sense of the tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to Thomas Aquinas College for a year, so I know something about Thomas School.
Yeah. Does that come out clearly in the education that it's
Oh, at Thomas Aquinas College, yeah, it's like 4 years of mandatory Latin, and you don't actually. But here's the thing: you don't actually touch Aquinas until third year. You actually start like first year philosophy is Plato. You read all the dialogues of Plato in first year philosophy, so it's Plato's the foundation, and then sophomore year is Augustine, and then you don't touch Aquinas until junior year. And everybody studies the same thing. It's like there are no electives. It's just like no electives. They won't accept transfer credits from anywhere, except for there is a notable exception. They will accept transfer credits from Franciscan University of Steubenville and St. John's because they both have like similar programs that where they feel like it'll apply.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a very classical kind of.
It is, yeah. It's a Catholic classical education model. It's very conservative, but it's interesting. It's very conservative, but it's also not. It's a very anti-Trump. Like it's like very like old school kind of conservative.
So it's not the rad Catholics, huh?
Not really, not exactly. Yeah. Well, at least that's true of the Santa Paula. That's true of the Santa Paula campus where I was.
Yeah.
Anthony Hopkins drove Anthony Hopkins drove by the campus back in like what 2012, 2013, something like that. And he was so inspired by the beauty of the campus. He came onto the campus and ended up talking to the students. There's a video of it online. It's hilarious. It really is a beautiful place.
My daughter went to Baylor. The trad Catholics at Baylor kind of dominated, which was a bit surprising at a Baptist school.
Yeah.
In fact, it got to be a bit much, the radical conservative. Good to see you, Jordan. Everything going well?
Going well. I found a little bunker to do this from.
Oh, you're at the you're monking it.
Oh no. Okay, so that was supposed to be last week, but I had a while ago after we started the course, I actually had to reschedule that because of the move and transition and whatnot. So I didn't get to do that. I didn't get to fulfill that, promise that I was going to give you the real life, exposure to to the contemplative scene. But no, this is I'm at my niece's graduation last night, so we traveled to Joplin. I mean, Paul, you know what that's all about.
Yeah. All right. Well, you're mixing with old chums, I bet.
It's funny, yeah. There was like I just because my nephew is about to be finish his second year at Ozark, where where I went, and he and some of his friends were over last night at the party, and so they were like sitting me down, wanting to ask me questions, stuff about Maximus. These are guys for context for the rest of you. It's like this is a Bible college, so this is they don't get a ton of church history or anything, so they were very interested. So it was good.
Jordan,
In
were you and
fact,
JD Lionheart at Ozark at the same time? JD Lionheart?
Yeah,
Okay.
he was at. In fact, we were in a Christology class together.
Okay. All right, cool.
But
He's a
he
great
was
guy. I've had him on
he's
Girl
a,
Country. He's just awesome, dude.
yes. I think I watched that because I was like, oh yeah, I know both those guys. So yeah,
Yeah.
because he was like, I guess he was probably a year and a half behind me, or maybe 2 years. Like he did come in after, but yeah, we definitely overlapped, had even a few classes together. And actually he had started writing a version of that first book I think that you talked about
hmm
while he was here. And a
hmm
version of that he used in the Christology course. We had the thing where you like wrote a paper and then you had someone like do critical responses and then there's a discussion. I was the one who did a critical response to the for like early version of that book.
Right.
It was funny though because I was much more in like a Wittgenstein phase, and so a
Gotcha.
lot of my critiques were Wittgensteinian slash like DC Phillips and some of these other guys, and so I probably wouldn't actually be as harsh as I was, but he took it well, and we had a good time. So
Nice.
and your brother is
yes,
there,
yes,
right? At Ozark?
yeah. He's a professor of New Testament. I can't remember what his title is now, but he's a professor of New Testament. His main area is the Apocalypse of John, and but he wrote a book published with man, one of those European outlets, that publishes a ton of like New Testament dissertations. Apocalypse of John, the writer's relationship and use of like his interaction with the Roman imperial, especially like triumphal entry imagery, but it's a broader argument about to what degree can you call the Apocalypse of John anti-imperial versus something else, and he makes use of like a lot of post-colonial theory, like James C. Scott and Alibaba or whoever, not Alibaba, someone else. Um,
Was
uh,
wasn't he on JD's podcast recently talking about that?
yes,
I didn't catch the whole
yes,
thing yet. It's one of those things I want to get to, but I haven't got to yet. But yeah.
that's it, Nate. That's
Good.
it. Yeah, no, he was. Yeah, and I didn't even know he was doing that. I was like, oh wow, it's funny. But
Good.
he did his PhD at Edinburgh University, so with Helen Bond, the great first century historian. So it's funny too because like we're like first generation like college goers in our family, like mostly our entire extended family. Like nobody really did that, and then we just sort of like took it to the extreme.
I'd
So
say.
so it's
Yeah.
fun though when we get together, and it's cool because I think it's one of those, the dynamic is like he's sufficiently in a different field, even though like, but I also sufficiently know about it and vice versa, that the conversations are fun. You don't have to worry about any weird dynamics. It's just like, oh man, it's awesome. It's really interesting. Or what, like you can ask good questions because you know enough about it. I'm not sure everybody else around us likes it, but we talked about it. So,
We're
all
looking
right. Well, we
forward to
want to
today. This is exciting stuff you've laid out here for us.
thank you, Paul. Well, I'm looking forward to it as well. Yeah, so we'll just start if you guys are all. It's the last week, and I can't believe that. I mean, geez, 8 weeks, 2 months. Like, I don't know, Paul. When you first pitched this to me, I was just like, okay, that's a lot of time. It's like, do people really want to do this with me that long, that much? I mean, it's a lot of minutes and seconds you add up there.
This has been one of the finest courses I've ever participated in. Just the way you put it together. You've brought it every week. So you have shined. So yeah, I've never had a better 8 weeks.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. That also makes me feel a little better about letting you down today. So that's not just kidding. That's, at least I cleared the bar 7 out of 8 times. No, I appreciate it, Paul. And really, I should say up front, just before I forget, my great thanks to Paul and to Forging Plowshares in general, both because they've been prodding me to do this for a while. I mean, this isn't like this was something, Paul, I think you probably mentioned it at least a year ago, maybe longer. And I had to keep putting it off and my schedule's uncertain, blah, blah, blah. And so we finally found a time, finally. So I appreciate the invitation and the incitement, and then also just hosting it and, putting it out there. And I assume everyone does, it's here, but like Paul's podcasts, I've been listening to them actually a lot lately because I've been doing a lot of housework. And so I just definitely recommend you check out that stuff. His blog is great. It's sort of this, diamond in the rough because Central Missouri, what with all of its natural beauty, I don't know, not sure I would have predicted the likes of Paul Axton residing there and emerging from there. So okay, so yeah, thank you, Paul, for that. And so this last week, because I think I mentioned last session, this I do, I have done a lot of talking, and I realize that's part of it. And I'm giving like a little presentation at the beginning. We're reading text. Some of them are difficult and dense, and there's a lot there. Maximus, though, as you probably well know, well, I know that you well know by now at least, is worth the time, number one. And it's also just I remember like Hans Urs von Balthasar once wrote about origin. He said that, when we place origin next to the likes of Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, this is just to admit the facts of the matter. And then of course when he's writing that in the 50s, 60s, it's still the whole renaissance around origin and recovering and rediscovering origin's potential was certainly in the Catholic circles, was definitely still, one of these controversial things. In fact, it's funny, the students I was talking to last night, that's one of the, it's like, they haven't had much in church history thing, but one of the things they've heard is Origen's a heretic. So they were like, what's up with this Origen? Why do you like him so much? Like, why is he a heretic? I mean, it doesn't make, so I'm like, all right, look, let's buckle up here, So I was like going into this, like, here are 6 things Origen was the first to do, and there wouldn't be any Christianity as you know it if it wasn't for him. So let's just calm down. But, but I do think, I don't think Maximus is possible without Origen. I don't think there would have ever been a Maximus without Origen and the entire tradition right there. But I still think in terms of just the raw, to use a word from the very first week, synthesis, synthetic power, potential of Maximus's thought, his writings, and the kind of spiritual life out of which that comes. That's important. I think his name should be there too. I really do. And I'm not saying that just as like, hey, this is my guy, I write books on him, so you should think he's important. I think I'm not, by far not the first. I mean, Balthasar himself, the Russians already in the late 19th century. I mean, people for a long time in the modern era started to realize, okay, this is a guy who's a perennial luminary in the Christian tradition, whose synthetic power is I don't know if it's second to none, it's close, but it's right up there with everyone else who's second to none. So I think he ought to secure that. I think he's a uniquely important figure for all the reasons we talked about the first week. And so hopefully you see by now that all of the talking, all the presenting, all the texts we've read, all the points of discussion and so forth, it really is worthwhile to do with Maximus, and he's someone that's worth returning to. It's funny for me personally, when you write a dissertation and the book and you do some projects and articles and stuff on like the same guy, I know lots and lots and lots of people are like, I kind of want to get out of this and do something else. And I feel that too. It's like, I want to go read some more Hegel. I mean, who doesn't? I know all of you do, but I'm just kidding. But I want to read, whatever. There's all kinds of stuff I want to read. And I do try to do that, but I don't think I can ever just leave Maximus. I don't think I can just move on. And I might not always write, at a certain levels about him, but and so I hope you found in him, if you hadn't already, I hope you found in him a kind of companion, for the journey, spiritual life, mystical life, theological thinking, synthesis, synthetic thinking. And so all I'm going to do today, because I've done a lot of talking about this and a lot of promoting and cheerleading about this, I'm going to say some brief things, kind of more by way of just turning up some of the major themes we've already touched on, just to kind of like refresh us a little. and I have a whole thing here I could go into about the text of letter 2, which I'm not going to do. But if we want to look at some specific text, by all means, bring that up. But then I really I would rather spend most of the time today hearing back from you all, both questions or lingering points you want to talk about or themes you want to talk about or anything like that, not only from this week in this reading, but maybe from anything we've gone over. So since our last meeting, I want to open up that space for us to do that. So okay, so I got a few words to say probably here in about 10 minutes, and then I do want to open it up. I know it's always risky for me to give a number because I'm a qualitative thinker, so I just ignore quantities. So this is funny. This Maximus's letter 2. This is, by the way, the second English translation of it. This is my translation. The other one was done by Father Andrew Louth in the 90s. It's pretty good. I mean, I differ on him on a few things. The French translation's pretty good. Not as good as Louth's, I think. But it's still, though, even though this is only the second translation in English, it's still just one of these texts that are just, it's like quintessential Maximus. And I want to read and this is from the 17th century. Maximus's first editor. I don't remember if I put it in. Oh no, you got this text. So yeah, you saw it in the first footnote. I had to put it in there. Combeferre was his name, Francois Combeferre. He says this. This is how he and this is in Latin, and translated from Latin is my translation. He says, in this letter on love, truly, I put it this way in your text, Maximus is at his very best. I took that from Louth. I think I'm going to change it to just Maximus acts maximally. So I want to keep that Latin, Vere maximum agit maximus. So in this letter on love, truly Maximus acts maximally, or like almost lives maximally. And I know not whether anyone could write with a more divine and greater emphasis on love, the mystery of which the holy man has most wondrously disclosed, not only here, but scattered in all other places as well. I confirm that. Whoever should deeply imbibe this letter with his or her soul will find that the purpose in its precept and law is especially of God, nothing less than the purpose of the entire dispensation and mystery of Christ, that we might be one with God and with one another, and in turn that we might care for and be cared for by others. It's just amazing to think that this is being written in the 17th century, and that's a very nice snapshot of what his first editor, that's what he gets out of Maximus. In a lot of ways, that's kind of what I want to communicate as well throughout the whole class, and especially this last week. By way of doing that, I just want to recount about 3 or 4 main themes that we've touched on throughout the course, and that definitely, and another reason why I had this letter here in the last is because I actually think hopefully you saw a lot of connections. I mean, a lot of strands that we followed out surface in these like 7 quick pages, and so I just want to kind of highlight them, turn them up, might help us think a little bit before we kind of get into a longer discussion about ramifications, questions, lingering things. So synthesis. Okay, got to start there. It's where we started the class. It's a Greek word. I've already pointed that out a million times. It's not Hegel's creation. It is a Greek word. It's a common Greek word. And it's an important key word in later Christological conciliar tradition. I just finished reading over again. I was reading back through Leontius of Jerusalem, a major source of Maximus, only kind of recently discovered as a separate character from Leontius of Byzantium. Definitely Maximus read both of them because sometimes he just lifts lines you can see from in certain arguments as well. So I read over some Leontius's texts against the Miaphysites or monophysites, as they put it. And synthesis, the exact nature of synthesis, a synthesized nature versus synthesized or composite person. These are all massive themes. But I think as hopefully you've recognized that throughout the course, it's exactly because this is the sort of content, almost like the task itself of Christology. How is it that this man, it's right back to the beginning, right? How is it that this man who is bleeding and dying on the cross, is he through whom all things were made? How is it this man we can say we know who his parents are, as it does in the Gospels, also is the one who made his parents? This isn't just antinomy for antinomy's sake. This isn't just let's come up with abstract opposition so that we can magically resolve them. This is just simply the content of Christology. There would be no question or task or inquiry into who is Christ, who do you say that I am, if what didn't immediately strike you is some sort of bizarre, at least astonishing confluence of opposites, right? Or in Maximus's terms from Big 5 that you read in the second week or first or second week, I can't remember now. Second week, I think, a generation of opposites even. Genesis ton enentium. That is what shocks you, you know? This is the thing that Gregory of Nyssa already said back in his Catechetical Orations. If I saw fire burning upwards, I wouldn't think anything. But if I see fire burning downwards and as if it were acting out of its nature, it should be burning upwards. Smoke goes upwards. Why is it burning down? There I'm stuck. There I'm awestruck. There I'm, amazed. So it catches your attention for one thing, precisely because it starts to abrogate or supersede or transcend what you expect naturally to be the case. That is to say, common sense or your intuition of how things must be, your formal intuitions. And so the content of Christology is really the content of everything, surprise, surprise, which is synthesis. Now, of course, the question is, what kind of synthesis? Is there a generic synthesis? No. Is there an abstract synthesis? No. Is there some formulaic synthesis or statement that captures all? No. Remember from the first week, the logos, he's talking about his recipient, Maximus says in Opusculum 1, the logos has taken a face in you, and life itself has the logos as its own logos. There's this like the synthesis of the living being, to borrow from Cyril of Alexandria's. We don't say we don't say that he lives two lives. We say he is the one living being. That sort of vital synthesis really is just spirit. I think that's what we often mean reflectively or not about what's the spiritual life. The spiritual life is the life of personal, interpersonal integration of all these different disparate things that seem like they defy synthesis, but it's exactly the task and the reason of being to synthesize them in and as yourself and in your own way, etc. So synthesis becomes the task. It becomes, and it's a task of thinking Christianly and spiritually because it's the content of Christology. You see, this is a sort of circle, and I realize that. If Christ, I actually think it's unavoidable, and I think it's good, this circle. I don't think it's vicious. If Christ is the beginning and end of all things, the Alpha and Omega, then the formal point there, the formal intuition is that the content of who Christ is the same thing as the content of everything Alpha to Omega. This is what I called, I think at one point in the week, hopefully I did, the Originian way of thinking, because I think he does think this way already, and that tradition does, and they have variations, but that same basic pattern shows up. It's also just the New Testament, so that's a win. But so the task arises from the content of Christology. Admittedly, though, that content is a particular judgment, right? If you're an Arian, you don't need this. You can put him safely at some sort of point of the hierarchy of being, even if he's a mediator, even if he's not just created, but he's sort of both. And, so it is true that it's a unique kind of Christology that then informs the task of thinking Christianly. And as you think Christianly and think towards Christ, then you're going to refine that, what it is the content is, right? And this is the circle. I think it's basically the circle of all human knowing. I don't think it's necessarily particular to Christianity or something, but I'm just saying that's how it takes on flesh, as it were. That's the vitality, the life of thinking Christianly from this perspective. Synthesis as life, synthesis as action, synthesis as a face, synthesis as the interpenetration of perichoresis of multiple persons, right, as one life. So that we could even say that even in the Trinity itself, himself, however you want to put it, the Trinity is just as much a perpetual achievement of the oneness of that being as it is that which presupposes the essential oneness in order to be. We got to be serious about that if we don't think the divine essence is a genus or a kind. It's not a category in that way. So what is the oneness? What's the actual oneness, the substance of the oneness, right? It has to be almost Father and Son, Son and Father, Spirit, and both, all of them together in one, whole and whole, holy, as Maximus would say. And that is just as much an achievement of the only one and only oneness of God's being God as it is something that God is or presupposes in order to go generate a son. And then after that, the Spirit proceeds. So what the incarnation does in the synthesis of Christ is it takes the logic of God himself, I'm going to put it crudely now, tips it vertically in order to make that accessible as the logic of the world itself. That wouldn't really be possible unless God could become one of his own creatures and remain the cause of all creatures. So causality has to be transcended as we normally intuit it. The logic, well, from last week, right? The logic of Christ and the life of Christ do not bear the marks of generation and corruption. That's beginning and end as we normally perceive it. Okay, so anyway, I could talk about this forever. I'm going to have to kind of move on. But synthesis is this key word, but not a synthesis of nature. Nature understood as an impersonal, logical necessity, but a synthesis of life, of action, and ultimately, per our this week, of love. That moves into the other major theme then is person. I've already brought that in with a discussion of synthesis. We saw that especially last week in thinking about prayer and discernment. Person as that's the real thing God is set out to make. He doesn't set out to make some order, some nice picture that doesn't move, some grand matrix of numbers or something. He set out to make children, and it seems impossible because how can God, even for God, how can God make a creature that has, precisely because it's made, has to begin, which is the very thing God should never do, have to begin. If you have to begin, you're not God. What if God, who begins all things, can make himself begin? That's the incarnation. Now having to begin is no longer an obstacle to you having to becoming God. Or to say, words of John 1, to becoming a child of God, a legitimate one. Yes, it's by adoption, but I think we already know, even those of us that know adopted children or are adopted or have adopted, that's just because it's not biological doesn't mean it's not real. In so many ways, grace and supernatural acts are the acts of adoption. Or yes, they're a supernatural, supra-inherent, commonsensical way to achieve the result, but the result is no less real and actual. So by grace, we're made God, according to Maximus. We become God by grace. But also, that's because the Son of God, who is Son by nature, can become the Son by grace. So since he is the synthesis in his person, no abstract opposite that you can throw up to me to why it is that we could never be fully one with God will stand. Because God's own action and his own honestly insane kenotic humility has exploded all of our a priori categories and everything we think is possible or not. And actually, the truly humble disposition, in my opinion, is one that has the highest ambitions for the beginning and end, the ultimate purpose of creation. Not because I want to be some kind of Superman in Nietzsche's sense, not because as sometimes people remarkably wrong accuse like Hegel or the idealists of it, because I want to like jam everything into my head as an idea, but because I don't want to defy God's own ecstatic love. You remember that's letter 9. The natural human being who thinks he or she is sort of more wise and prudent because they gladly occupy a middle position that's neither too extreme towards the beasts nor too extreme towards becoming like God. I'll be a nice little servant. Well, guess what? You're still defying God's will because he is not out to make servants. God doesn't need servants. He doesn't need anything like that. He doesn't want anything like that. Do you want that? And so if you don't, surely your Father in heaven doesn't want that out of you. And so it can look so easily like piety and like reverence to resist God's love because it's too extreme. But who are you to resist in that way? You can, I'm not saying it's like but who are you to say, surely not God? And I love this little remark that Robert Jensen makes He's got a nice essay called Jesus and the Trinity from Pro Ecclesia a long time ago. And he says in his Jensen way is like Midwestern terse, unadorned, but super incisive way. He says the whole history of Christianity or of Christology is simply this. Surely not. Surely not that far. And then again, yes. Surely not. Surely not that far. And then again, yes, right. And he narrates like the first 700 years of the development of Christology in that way. It's really nice because he's like, okay, we Council of Nicaea, right? All right. I mean, he through him all things were made, sure, but like he himself isn't equal with the Father, right? He's not God. I mean, he's the highest, whatever. Yes, he is. Okay. All right, fine. Okay, so we got that. He's equal with the consubstantial with the Father. Okay, cool. Great. But that doesn't, I mean, surely he's not like consubstantial. Like that means if he's God, he's not fully like us. I mean, the story is right. He doesn't have a mother, right? We don't want to say the mother of God. God doesn't have a mother. That's absurd. It's just stupidity. We're just inviting criticism, right? Actually, yes. That is what we're saying. So you can plot these like controversies each time. It's this sense of surely it doesn't mean that, the fuller kind of more radical, ridiculous. And again, it's not being radical just to be radical. It would be like me saying, to my wife, like, don't be too nice to me. Don't care about me too much. Don't actually look after my well-being too much or our kids because, I mean, let's not be ill. Let's not be a little, So this is kind of the amazing thing to me about Maximus around synthesis and person and the cosmic scope of it and the kind of end of all things. And it's so absolutely ambitious in a way. It's actually an impossible task. Who can synthesize everything that we, even now? Who could have 700 years ago, much less now? Right? And yes, we can work together and that's important. Sure. But even then, can the church really grasp everything going on right now and everything in the world, all the subtle questions? And I think it would be a fool's errand were it not for the fact that God's own kenosis and the radical depths to which he can identify himself with even the least of these, so that what you do to them, you do to him. Or so that when Stephen is stoned, Christ is stoned. Why do you persecute me? He says in Acts 9. If you believe that, if you're a Christian and you believe that, you sort of have forfeited your rights to be a nice, prudent, modest thinker in the beginning and end of things. If you've already conceded that God can be crucified by human beings, that God can die, that God is raised from the dead, you've sort of given away the game. Like you could pretend like you're modest and you're a careful thinker and you don't want to be too brash and brazen, but like I think Maximus's way shows us like it's actually more brazen in the face of the fact of Christ to resist all the other implications. Then you go back to Colossians, you go back to New Testament stuff said in Ephesians 1:10 and all that, and it's like, oh, actually that kind of ambition, that kind of immodesty, as it were, in our ambitions for what is true of the beginning and end of all things, which is to say what is actually true. That actually was there all along. Sort of part and parcel of this whole thing, I think. Now, that's a general disposition, right? I haven't said anything about any particular issue or whatever, and you still have to have all the conversations and arguments and dialogues and so forth. But I just I don't know, maybe I've been talking to Thomas too long, but okay, I won't say anything more. Okay, and so this is where we're landing then. I kind of already got there. I think that's one. If there's any major theological takeaway from the whole course and from even just what I've studied in Maximus, it has to be this: that there is a direct correlation between God's absolute humility and then the astonishing ambition with which he's undertaken the project of creation. What do I mean? Well, because his humility isn't just some kind of disposition or mind, like a mental attitude he has from afar. His humility takes substance, and it is him being human. The humus of the earth, the dust of the earth. Genesis 2:7 says that the human being, the living human being, is right, as like the body sort of crafted out of the earth, and then the divine spirit breathed into the nostrils, and we have the living being. What's so amazing about the incarnation is that it actually says it goes beyond that image. It incorporates, but it goes beyond that image and says that actually he became the dust too. And not just the dust, but the dust that we had even created, the false incarnations that we've been talking about the last few weeks, right? He became sin and a curse for us precisely not just because our barriers are not just that we're created from nothing, but that we also have to face what we create that really is nothing, the falseness, the lie, the deceptions, right? And so what's so amazing is that Christ became all of that, not in order to make it, but in order to make it to overcome it, because we want to make it in our own freedom. And the entire process is to bring spirits into true being through their own freedom, because there's no other way that spirits do, persons do, you might say. So God's absolute ambition, on the one hand, you could put it that way, he has this great ambition to raise children in creation. That seems by nature impossible, but lucky for us, God isn't bound by any nature, certainly not even the one we conceive as the divine nature. Okay, so since he's not bound by any kind of nature, he can overcome that, and so that's his ambition, right? His great ambition. But because he's humble, he's willing to do and become anything in order to effect that, all the while respecting our freedom and making us through our own freedom. And then you can reverse it. Precisely because he has that humility, he can accomplish the ambition. And so I do think it's high time for us to, and some of it, I don't know everybody's background, but like where I was raised, something like deification of theosis would be kind of, it's too much, right? It's too arrogant, it's too prideful, it's too whatever, or even a lot of the themes we've talked about in this course, or that you've seen Maximus explicitly say, hey, how about from today, letter 2, the discussion of Abraham and stuff. Somehow God acquires a likeness to Abraham. I thought it was Abraham was supposed to be becoming like God. How is it that God can be in any kind of passive relationship without relinquishing his status as God with his lowly, pathetic creatures? Well, wouldn't make sense, would it? Unless in his absolute humility, he makes himself equal to nothing precisely because that which comes from nothing can become equal to him, who is everything. That's the logic here. This is the incarnation, and the incarnation is everything. So I think it's high time to just kind of get over ourselves a little bit. Not you guys. I'm not preaching at you, but I'm just saying like where I grew up and stuff. It's actually a species of arrogance to think this is too much. It can be, right? Because it's to say to God, surely not. Just like Jensen, surely not. No, that's too much. It's like too good to be true. And then I gotta quote George MacDonald: if it's too, nothing is too good to be true. There's only things that are so good they must be true. All right, because the true and the good are supposed to be one and the same. I think I could go on and on. I just want to say one thing about the letter, and then I'll just stop. I've definitely already broken my promise, as I promised. If you promise to break promises, then you get around the whole thing. See. I just want to throw out to you. I kind of forgot I have a basic outline of letter 2. I've done that a few times, and I forgot to put it up on the questions for the week, but I can send that to anyone who's interested. I take it that the thesis, as it were, or the main theme of the whole letter, is what shows up there in 2:9, the way I have it numbered. 2:9 says in there, we do not separately assign one sort of love for God and another for neighbor. Rather, there is a single and same and whole love, which is both owed to God and is what binds human beings to one another. And you guys, I'm sure you sensed it throughout, but this is in a sense a kind of running meditation, the double love command, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. The second is like or love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. Second, like love your neighbor as yourself. And you get to 1 John, who says, who kind of throws a kind of wonderful wrench in it, who says, but of course you can't love God who you don't see unless you love your neighbor who you do see. So hold on a second. There's a condition on my success. The successful achievement of loving God now depends on how well you love your neighbor. Isn't that kind of in a certain sense the exact opposite of what religion's supposed to be about? I thought religio was all about like your love for God, right? Above all, worshiping God above all, your absolute allegiance and obedience to God and trust above all. And the thing is, again, because we're not doing the either or dichotomy stuff, that's still true, right? Yes, that is true. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and strength. It's just that the God you love becomes your neighbor. That's the thing. So it isn't a negation of that. When you love the least of these, why is it that what you do the least of these you do to me? Why is it that when you persecute the church, you persecute me? Why is it when you do injustice to anyone, you've done it to me? Why is it that Maximus says in Mystagogy, right, that the word of God suffers in all mystically to the exact degree to which they suffer? Why is there such a tight correlation? It's because the God who you give all your allegiance to, your religio to, and all that other stuff, is the exact same God who does not want to be God in the way you initially thought he must be. That is, as like a tyrant or a monarch, or as just a higher superior being. He is constantly becoming the lower part of the hierarchy. Not to deny natural hierarchy, but to deny its finality as fact. Because guess what? If you think the hierarchy is absolute and self-evident, you cannot believe in the incarnation very well. You can go with Nestorius then and say, God doesn't have a mother. That's part of what makes him higher than everyone else. But you just said he does too. Mary is her name, right? Well, God doesn't grow and change. I mean, of course, right? He's eternal and immutable. Yeah, but this guy grew in wisdom and stature before God and for all human beings. Is he God? Okay, so now we've also said that. Well, God, if God doesn't do anything, he doesn't suffer. Not like God is like in competition with any other being. He's on the same level, right? Again, by nature, that's absolutely true. You never relinquish that. But this guy, his passion, right, is actually, according to both the Gospel of Mark and the Gospel of John, is the revelation of his divinity. So we've said yes, but also on all of these things. And so much of what's puzzled me personally, and that what Max was kind of like, turned up to 11 or like infused with all this fuel, is like, I've been taught all my life that Jesus is the answer to everything. But it's so bizarre to me that we have one sort of logic for Jesus, and then another logic for everything else. That's functionally to say he is not the answer to anything. If the logic that's proper to Jesus in the incarnation is an exception to everything. Now, if he is the Logos, he reveals the logic not only of God, but precisely as man, also the logic of humanity, and precisely as created, also the logic of creation, and precisely as both, also the logic of their very relation. Otherwise, he's just a very nice, interesting, incidental, may or may not have been firework that God set off, but is mostly extrinsic to anything that matters and anything that's fundamental. So the point would be, if I'm going to take that seriously, that fundamental, that formal judgment that he's the beginning and an end of everything, as Jesus, not as some, sort of phantom lurking deity behind the Jesus screen. If he really is God as enfleshed, then he is God as the top and the bottom of the hierarchy. That doesn't abolish the hierarchy. In fact, you kind of need the hierarchy in order to even perceive this humility, right? You almost need a top and the bottom in order to see him descend. So I'm not saying there's no point to it or no purpose to it. I'm just saying that we cannot absolutize it. If we do absolutize it, then we're basically saying Jesus is an exception to everything and not much the answer. And we may not want to do that, but that's performatively a contradiction. This is why I think Maximus lands so heavily and honestly kind of remarkably, like the starkness with which he says this, it's kind of hard for me to find a parallel. I find some parallels, but this claim that the exact same, there's not two different loves, the vertical and the horizontal, but this is one and the same in the whole love. This to me is so much of Maximus's thinking, even the most kind of metaphysical precision, the metaphysically precise parts leads to this sort of conclusion. So that he can say, for example, in Ambiguum 10, that they say God and humanity are paradigms of each other. Or he can say right in the on the Lord's Prayer that you read, when we pray, forgive us as we forgive our debtors, we bid God to come imitate us. So now God's the imitator. Or he can say, as I've already mentioned, that he suffers mystically and all in the mystagogy and so forth. Or actually more kind of boldly from that text, he says that Jesus is completed through me as I'm being saved. I don't think God needs to be completed right? Isn't that kind of what makes him God? Well, sure, yeah. It's not like his nature is being completed. It's not like so you're not saying he's stuck in certain finite conditions and he's being completed in a linear sequence. But you're also not saying he's simply the negation of all sequence. What you're saying is the whole is far more paradoxical than either one of those sides will allow you to think it is. That's not because you had a great idea or a great system, but it's because you believe Jesus is both God and human. Okay. I could go on and on about this letter. There are several parts of it that are really remarkable to me, but I will not. I will absolutely and finally let asceticism kick in, fall silent before you, grovel in the dust, ask for repentance, and hear your input. Okay, that's enough. I couldn't think of any more flowery things to say. All right. I will stop and cease and desist and open. Let's talk about this. And it can be from any part of the course. So
this is unrehearsed, but I'd like to say this first, Jordan. Just the sheer scope of what we're talking about is almost brings me to tears, the magnitude and what Paul says that after a long talk that you've given that you think is too long, we realize what Paul is saying is true. Jordan's been soaring, and there's room to soar. There's so much here. Just to look down and see what the scope of this vision is. It's just, and I want to hear the quote from Erzban Baltazar again, because I didn't catch it. But did you say between Augustine and Aquinas, there's what now?
Yeah, he says of Origen, he says that, when we rank Origen alongside Augustine, and when we put Origen alongside Augustine and Thomas, we are simply saying what is obviously the truth or something like that.
Okay. I was thinking that he was saying that about Maximus.
I'm saying that about Maximus.
Okay. Oh, yeah. And I agree. I think that's what we're looking at is the scope of Christology expanding before our very eyes beyond Augustine and beyond Aquinas to, be the voice of Origen, but more specifically and pointedly and I think more well stated is the view from Maximus, because it's more complete and it also is so true to Chalcedon. And anyway, that's been kind of my listening. I'm a big picture type person, but I also get very lost in the weeds of talking about the big picture. My wings have started to melt as yours have soared. I'm listening and enjoying this, and I want to thank you for just introducing us to this person, this theologian. I think he is that important to the future of Christianity, and our roles in learning how to be Christian in this world, in this time. So whether or not Maximus has shaped the Western thinking as much as he should have, I think that's changing now, even as we speak. So you're a big part of that. I'm thankful to have been part of this class, but there's so many things that it touches on. I wouldn't know where to start. I'm going to yield the floor because I just want to say it first to you. Thank you for introducing us in such an effective way during this class, and thank you, Paul, for hosting it.
No, I thank you all for all the work you put into it. And I do realize too, like my approach has very much been, I'm just gonna throw you all in. Because and this is how I teach a lot, even like if I've got a semester long class, somewhere. One of the things I want to do, I don't so much care about whether or not people memorize all the details, and get you can walk me from A to Z on the difference between a hypothesis and an hypothesized reality. Okay. But what I do want to try to achieve is to give that sense. I don't know what else to put it, like a feeling or a fundamental intuition or like a connection or a vital link that kind of like I want to light something on fire in you that says, if you ever need to think back through or revisit or you'll know where the fire is and where you can find the warmth and the brilliance. It's not me. I mean, I'm pointing to like Maximus, and it's like that's one place. It's not that he has all the answers. I don't think he has all the answers. I don't think he could have all the answers. I'm not sure why we would expect that, but I also agree with you fundamentally, obviously, that he's going to have, even if it's not all of the details of everything he says, although I think they go quite a long ways, to be honest, and have not yet been fully addressed or incorporated, even in some of the thickness of the Western tradition. I mean, it's just basic stuff, right? Like the Latin Middle Ages didn't have Maximus available to them. They mislabeled Maximus as the scholiast of Dionysius, and really only about 1/4 of those are him. Eriugena fell on tough times, and he's the one that would have known and did know in the 9th century Maximus and did translate him. I don't know what happens to his translations after the 10th, 11th century. They're gone. I don't know where they are. You can look at the technical discussions of Christology and you're just going to see there's nothing about perichoresis in them. There's very little about in hypothesization within them. The composite Christ is sort of thrown out there, but then qualified away to oblivion almost. And so, yeah, but at the same time, I have to say, it's not as if the East fully has incorporated Maximus either, in my opinion. Andrew Louth, for example, calls Maximus's logi doctrine, the logi logos. He says it's a lonely meteorite in the Eastern tradition. And so, man, if it's a lonely meteorite there, I'm not sure. So there is the sense that Maximus is still to have his day. And it's sort of a long day, and it's one that's been dawning for a while, for a century, I think, in these parts. Just such interesting ecumenical potential too. I mean, it's so fascinating to me to this day that the only two figures that I could see that have explicitly claimed something like Neo-Chalcedonian Christology, of which Maximus is a part, are the Russian Orthodox theologians, Sergei Bulgakov and Robert Jensen, the American Lutheran. And then there's so much, I think Karl Rahner in the Catholic world is honestly basically ends up there. So, yeah, definitely so much more to think about. But hopefully the encouragement isn't just like for the future of Christology, although that's where my heart always lies, but also just kind of the way of thinking, right? It's that, or I think Maximus allows us to think like not just what Origen thought, but in Origen's manner, which in my opinion is sort of the New Testament intuition itself. And yeah, we can argue and change the details and so forth, but I think it's a kind of absolutely clear example of like, this is what it would look like to really go all the way and allow the content that's developed in the 700 years from up to Maximus actually allow you to retain the form and then actually let the form to interpret the content of. So
the scope and the mystery is
exactly
what stands out to me about. There's so much we can't even speak to and probably shouldn't try, but it's the integrated holism of the cosmos and of mostly what you're saying is the person. I do have a quick question. You were going on the three things: synthesis, person, and what was the third?
I think the third I soared over. I had it as synthesis, person, and the cosmic scope.
Okay.
And all of those, by the way, I'm thinking as like nested within love, our theme for the week. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Just wanted to agree with you, Brad. So appreciated this class, and definitely wasn't just a scholastic exercise. This was real devotional kind of stuff. So appreciated it. I think the problem with it is that it's made me, when I go and hear, sermons or whatever, in my tradition, just sort of feel constantly disappointed and just constantly this sense of like, I think it's bigger than this, than what we're getting. And I even got that impression in your paper that you wrote in the other journal, right? Like that impoverished picture of what God is looking for from us, compared to what he's actually inviting us into in the cosmic participation that's going on.
Forging Plowshares is a community dedicated to cultivating the peaceful kingdom by providing in-depth, transformative biblical and theological education and discipleship. If you have found this podcast valuable, please remember to share on social media. If you have questions about what you've heard, Or if you'd like to learn more about how you can get involved with Forging Plowshares or even support this ministry financially, please visit our website, forgingplowshares.org.